Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Everyday English Channel with Tom and Kate. We're really happy to have you with us today.
Yes, thanks for being here again. It's always a good moment to sit down and have a calm, natural conversation together. How are you feeling right now?
I'm feeling good. Relaxed, actually. It's one of those moments where everything feels simple, and you can just talk without thinking too much. And you?
Pretty much the same. Nothing special, just a normal moment, and I think that's perfect for today's topic, because we're going to talk about something very practical: traveling in English.
Yes, and more specifically, how people actually speak when they travel. Not textbook English, not perfect sentences, but real conversations in real situations.
And before we get into it, if you enjoy these calm and practical English conversations, you can subscribe to the channel or share this episode with someone who is learning English. It really helps us, and we really appreciate it.
Absolutely. So let's start with something simple. When you travel, one of the first things you do is arrive somewhere new, maybe at an airport, a train station, or even a hotel. And usually, very quickly, you need to speak English.
Yes, and often the first interaction is very basic. Someone might ask you something like, "Where are you coming from?" or "Do you have a reservation?"
And what's interesting is that your answers don't need to be complicated. If someone asks, "Where are you coming from?" you can simply say, "From France," or "I'm coming from Paris."
Exactly. You don't need to build a long sentence. A short, clear answer is enough.
The same applies at a hotel. You arrive at reception, and someone might say, "Do you have a booking?" or "What's your name?"
And again, your answers are very simple. Yes, I have a reservation. It's under the name DuPont. Here is my ID.
These are short, direct, and very common.
Another important moment when traveling is asking for information.
Yes, that happens all the time. You might need to ask, "Where is the taxi area?" or "How do I get to the city center?"
And here again, simplicity works best. You don't need to say, "Could you please provide me with detailed directions?" You can simply say, "Excuse me, how do I get to the center?"
And people will understand you perfectly.
Another common situation is transportation.
Yes, like taking a bus, a train, or a taxi. You might need to ask, "Does this bus go to the airport?" or "How much is a ticket?"
Or even something very simple like, "Is this the right train?"
These questions are short, but extremely useful.
And the answers you receive are also usually short. Yes, it is. No, you need the next one. It's 10 euros.
Traveling conversations are often efficient. People don't use long sentences. They focus on getting information quickly.
Another very common situation is at restaurants.
Yes, that's a big one when traveling. You sit down, and the waiter might ask, "Are you ready to order?" or "What would you like?"
And again, your answers are simple. I'll have the chicken. I'd like a coffee. Can I get a water?
These are basic structures, but they are used everywhere.
And if you don't understand something, it's completely fine to say, "Sorry, could you repeat that?" or "What do you recommend?"
Yes, and that's important. You don't need to pretend you understand everything.
Another situation is when something goes wrong.
Yes, and that happens often when traveling. Maybe your room is not ready or your flight is delayed.
In those situations, simple language is still enough. For example, "My room is not ready," or "My flight is delayed."
And if you need help, you can say, "Can you help me?" or "What should I do?"
These are very direct but very effective.
Traveling English is not about complexity, it's about clarity.
Yes, and confidence comes from knowing that simple sentences are enough.
You don't need perfect grammar. You need to be understood.
And once you realize that, traveling becomes much less stressful.
Because you know you can handle the basic interactions.
And that's really the foundation of speaking English while traveling.
Once you move past the very first interactions when traveling, you quickly enter situations where the conversation becomes slightly longer, but still very simple in structure. One of the most common places for that is the hotel. When you arrive, after giving your name and your reservation, the receptionist often gives you information. They might explain breakfast times, Wi-Fi access, or how to get to your room. In that moment, you don't need to say much. Most of the time, you are listening, but you still need to react in a natural way. Simple responses like, "Okay, got it," or "Thank you," are more than enough. If something is not clear, you can ask, "Can you repeat that?" or "Where is the breakfast room?" These questions are short but very effective. You don't need to build long sentences. The goal is to understand and confirm information.
And something important to remember is that these situations are predictable. Hotels, airports, and restaurants follow similar patterns everywhere in the world. That means you will hear the same types of questions again and again. Once you've experienced it once, the second time becomes easier, and the third time even easier. That's how confidence builds when traveling.
Another very common situation is when you need help or have a small problem. For example, maybe your key doesn't work, or the Wi-Fi is not connecting, or something is missing in your room. In those cases, you don't need complicated explanations. You can say things like, "My key doesn't work," or "The Wi-Fi is not working," or "I don't have towels." These are simple sentences, but they clearly explain the situation.
And then naturally you might ask a question. Can you help me? Can someone check? Can I change rooms? Again, very simple structures, but extremely useful.
Another important moment during travel is when you interact with people outside of service situations. For example, asking someone in the street for directions. This can feel more stressful because it's less structured than a hotel or a restaurant, but in reality, it's still very simple. You can say, "Excuse me, where is the nearest station?" or "How do I get to the city center?" Most people will answer in a simple way, often with gestures as well.
And here, listening becomes very important. You might not understand every word, but you don't need to. You listen for key information. Left, right, straight, next street. Even partial understanding is often enough to move forward.
Another interesting situation is when you have small conversations with locals. These are not necessary, but they happen naturally. For example, someone might ask, "Where are you from?" or "Is this your first time here?" Your answers can stay very simple. "I'm from France." "Yes, it's my first time." "No, I've been here before."
And sometimes the conversation continues a little. You might add something like, "I really like this city," or "It's very beautiful," or "The food is great." Again, simple sentences, but they create connection.
And that's an important point. Traveling English is not only about solving problems, it's also about creating small moments of connection.
These moments don't require advanced vocabulary. They require simple, clear, and friendly communication.
Another situation that comes up often is shopping while traveling. You go into a shop, you look at something, and you might ask, "How much is this?" Or, do you have this in another size? The interaction is usually short and straightforward.
And when you decide to buy something, you can simply say, "I'll take it," or "Can I pay by card?"
These are phrases that you can reuse in many different countries.
Something else that helps a lot when traveling is accepting that you will not understand everything.
Yes, that's very important. Many learners feel stressed when they don't understand a sentence completely. But in real life, even native speakers don't catch every word all the time.
What matters is understanding enough to continue the interaction.
And if needed, you can always ask for clarification. Sorry, what do you mean? Can you say that again?
These are normal phrases, not signs of weakness.
And the more you use them, the more comfortable you feel.
Over time, you realize that traveling in English is not about speaking perfectly.
It's about being able to manage simple situations with confidence.
And once you reach that point, traveling becomes much more enjoyable.
As you spend more time traveling, you start to notice that many conversations follow patterns, but small variations always appear. And that's where things become interesting, because you need to adapt a little more. A good example is when you're using transportation regularly, not just once. At the beginning, you might only ask simple questions like, "Where is the station?" or "Is this the right bus?" But after a few days, you might need more specific information. You might ask, "Does this bus stop near the museum?" Or, "How long does it take to get there?" These are still simple questions, but they require a bit more understanding.
And in these situations, you also learn how to deal with answers that are not always perfectly clear. Sometimes people speak quickly. Sometimes they use expressions you don't know. Sometimes they give long explanations. But even then, you don't need to understand everything. You focus on key elements, numbers, directions, places. If someone says it takes about 20 minutes and you need to change at the next stop, you don't need to understand every word. You just need to catch 20 minutes and next stop.
Another situation that happens quite often is misunderstanding something. For example, you think someone said one thing, but they actually meant something else. Instead of feeling uncomfortable, you can simply clarify. You can say, "Sorry, do you mean this one?" Or, "Is that the same place?" These small questions help avoid bigger problems.
And something important to understand is that misunderstandings are normal when traveling. Even native speakers misunderstand each other sometimes. So it's not a sign that your English is bad. It's just part of communication.
Another useful skill while traveling is learning how to repeat or reformulate what you want to say. Sometimes you start a sentence and you realize it's not clear. Instead of stopping, you can simply say it again in a simpler way. For example, if you say something like, "I'm looking for transportation to the central part of the city," and you feel it's not clear, you can immediately say, "To the city center."
This kind of adjustment happens all the time in real conversations. People try something, then simplify.
And this is something that can really help learners feel more comfortable. You don't need to get it right the first time. You can adjust as you go.
Another situation that appears often during travel is when plans change. Maybe your train is canceled, or your flight is delayed, or a place is closed. In these moments, you need to react and ask new questions. You might say, "What can I do now?" Or, "Is there another option?" Or, "When is the next train?"
These questions are simple, but they are very important.
And again, the answers you receive might not always be perfectly clear, but you work with the information you have.
Another interesting aspect of traveling is that you often repeat the same types of conversations. Checking into a hotel, ordering food, asking for directions, buying tickets. At the beginning, each situation feels new, but after a few days, you start recognizing patterns.
And when you recognize patterns, your confidence increases because you already know what kind of questions to expect and what kind of answers to give.
This repetition is very powerful. It allows you to improve without studying in a traditional way.
Another point that becomes clear is that people around you are usually cooperative. They are used to tourists. They are used to different accents. They are used to simple English.
That means you don't need to feel pressure to speak perfectly.
Clear and simple communication is enough.
And if something is not understood, people will often help by repeating or simplifying.
This creates a very supportive environment for learning.
Over time, you begin to feel more relaxed when speaking. You don't overthink every sentence. You don't try to translate everything. You just speak.
And that's when traveling becomes not only easier, but also more enjoyable, because communication becomes natural, not stressful.
One thing that becomes very clear after a few days of traveling is that your confidence grows faster than you expect. At the beginning, every interaction feels a bit stressful. You think about your words, you hesitate, and you worry about making mistakes. But after repeating the same situations a few times, something changes. You start recognizing questions immediately. You don't need to translate everything. You already know what kind of answer is expected, and because of that, your responses become quicker and more natural.
This is a very important moment in the learning process. It's when English stops feeling like a subject and starts feeling like a tool. You are no longer thinking about the language itself. You are using it to do something. To check in, to order food, to ask for directions, to solve a problem. And that shift makes a big difference.
Another interesting point is that traveling forces you to focus on what is essential. You don't try to say everything perfectly. You focus on what matters, being understood. If your sentence is simple but clear, it works. And in most situations, that is enough.
This also helps reduce pressure, because you realize that communication is not about perfection. It's about interaction.
And once you accept that, you become more relaxed. You speak more easily. You react more naturally.
Another thing you may notice is that your listening improves without effort. At the beginning, you might struggle to understand certain accents or certain ways of speaking. But after hearing similar phrases again and again, your brain adapts. You start recognizing patterns, even if you don't understand every word.
This is why repetition in real situations is so powerful. You are not memorizing vocabulary. You are experiencing it.
And over time, these experiences build your confidence.
Another important aspect of traveling is that it teaches you to be flexible with language. Sometimes the word you want doesn't come to your mind. Instead of stopping, you find another way to say the same thing. You describe it differently. You simplify your idea.
This ability to adapt is much more important than knowing advanced vocabulary.
Because in real life, communication is rarely perfect.
It's dynamic, flexible, and sometimes imperfect.
And that's completely normal.
Another thing that helps a lot is your attitude. If you stay calm, polite, and open, most interactions go well. People respond to your attitude as much as to your words.
A simple hello, a smile, and a clear question can already create a good interaction.
And even if you make small mistakes, most people don't focus on them. They focus on the message.
That's why traveling is such a powerful way to improve your English.
It puts you in real situations where communication has a purpose.
And that purpose makes everything easier.
So if you take one idea from today's episode, it's this: you don't need perfect English to travel.
You need simple, clear, and practical English.
And the more you use it, the easier it becomes.
Over time, what feels difficult at the beginning becomes natural.
And that's when you realize you're making real progress.
Before we finish, thank you very much for spending this time with us today.
We hope this episode helps you feel more confident when traveling and speaking English in real-life situations.
If you enjoyed this conversation, you can subscribe to the channel or share it with someone who is learning English.
It really helps us grow, and we truly appreciate your support.
Join us in the next episode for another calm and practical English conversation.
Thanks again for listening.
And remember, keep speaking English every day.